Oh, I'm ecstatic. I just got my tickets yesterday, and everyone in my office knew I won tickets, and I was just psyched. I couldn't wait until this morning. I didn't sleep last night, even knowing I'm not going to meet the guy. I was just awesome.
He's fantastic.
What did you think of the other speakers so far?
Oh, they were great.
Just
very, very motivating. Very motivating.
Joe must go.
Joe must go?
Joe must go.
What does that mean?
It means that we need a new representative, Jackie Walorski.
Okay.
Thank you.
What did you think of her speech?
Oh, I love him because he educates you. It's not just his thoughts, but everything he says, he comes up with books, things for me, things for myself. And his teaching is just unbelievable. I've never found anyone who can teach as he does. And he backs it all up. That's what's so amazing to me. Whether you like him or not, he's excellent, just excellent. Oh my gosh, very excited. One of the first to get a ticket. Been here waiting all morning since 8 o'clock. And I'm very excited to hear him talk.
What did you think of the other speakers today?
I was so impressed with all of them, but particularly Murdoch. He should run for president. What a tremendous fellow he is. Someone who is weak but was made strong through a very intense situation, and I just have so much appreciation for him. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Why do I get the sneaking suspicion you're not clapping for me? I don't know. Two things before we bring out the main event today. I have here in my hand a picture of a gentleman named Ed Neufeld. It's a picture of him with President Barack Obama. Ed Neufeld posed for this picture when the Obama administration asked him to introduce Mr. Obama in Elkhart, Indiana earlier this year as he touted his stimulus bill. Ed Neufeld argued for that stimulus bill as a man who had lost his job at Monaco, an RV dealer. The reason I bring this up to you is because Mr. Neufeld is sitting up here today wearing a Glenn Beck t-shirt. I think that's what they call seeing the light. I also want to say real quickly, I just finished listening to Richard Murdoch in the first hour, and most of you had left immediately afterwards, so I wanted to save this comment until now. This year, Indiana is thankfully replacing one of its clueless senators, but in another 2 years, it needs to replace the other, and Richard, you have this Hoosiers vote. Earlier this summer, I was asked to speak at a small church in Pekin, Illinois. And I went there, and the first night, an elderly couple came in, and this lady was so ecstatic, and she came up and she said, "I am so thrilled to meet you." And I looked at her and I said, "Well, I'm thrilled to meet you too." And she said, "I watch you on television every night." I, of course, realized what was going on. My last name's Heck. I have a radio show. She'd gotten confused, and I said, "Ma'am, I think you have me confused with someone else." I wish that I could describe the way her countenance just dropped, which was a real builder for my self-esteem. She said, "You're not Glenn Beck?" And so I did the only thing I could do. I said, "Yes, I am. It's good to meet you." The truth is, friends, there is only one Glenn Beck. He may describe himself as a rodeo clown, but millions of Americans know much better. They know him as the man who is willing to stand in the gap. They know him as the man who will speak what so many are thinking but don't have the ability or platform to say. They know him as the man who does more than just know our country's heritage. He respects it, he studies it, he admires it, he teaches it. He is a constitutionalist, he is an inspiration, he's one of us because he's a patriot. My friends, Glenn Beck.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a seat, we've got a lot to do. It is good to be here. It is good to be in Indiana where things make sense. I want to talk to you today about where we're headed and some of the thoughts that I have. I feel like I have been for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been the guy who nobody wanted to listen to, nobody wanted to believe, and I understand that because what I had to say was pretty ugly. But I feel like I have been the guy who was ringing the bell, and now people are awake, and now I get to change and do a different job. And that is, my grandmother used to have a angle in the back porch, and we would be out in the farm with my grandfather, and she would ring it, and she'd say, "Come on in." And that was the time that we could eat, and the day was really over. And I feel like I get to ring the bell now and bring everybody in, because now is the time we have woken people up, and people have planted seeds, and the harvest is about to come in. It is, the fields are white, and it's good news from here on out. There's still trouble ahead of us. I'm going to get all the bad stuff out first. If anybody thinks this election is going to change everything, buckle up, gang, because I think it could make things much, much worse. Because the things that we have done during George W. Bush and now at an accelerated pace under Barack Obama, at some point you have to pay for those sins. At some point, that, as to quote Jeremiah Wright, those chickens are going to come home to roost. And they are. And I fear that no matter what happens, if you don't change out Congress, they will just lose more and more power. We will spend more and more money. The government will become more and more out of control, and you'll end up having to pay that price. If you do change Congress and you get a bunch of Tea Party people in there, you get a bunch of people who are, I don't care if they're Republican or Democrat or independent, they understand the principles of our government, which is minimal government. Government as small as it possibly can be. If you get those people in, cuts or gridlock is going to happen. And when those chickens come home to roost, then those who like big power and big government and know how to use the media will turn and say, "See? You see what's happened? We were better off before we had these people in." So I want you to know, one way or another, we're going to have tough times. And it's not because of Barack Obama, and it's not because of the Democrats alone. It is because all of us have wanted to believe things that weren't true. All of us have wanted to believe that we could have it all and live a lifestyle that was relatively easy compared to the rest of the world. But it's not true. And now what we have to do is we have to be better than we have been in the past. And I have to tell you, I went out last week, I was on vacation, and I went out to the Grand Tetons, to a town, it's a farming community of about 1,200 people, Driggs, Idaho. And it's a... There's one person, "Yeah, Driggs." It's a place that, you oftentimes have to pass the tractors on the road. And it just made sense to me. I was out fly fishing last week, and I had a moment just to live in the now. Most of my life now is living in the past, trying to figure out history and where we came from, and looking to the future and say, where are we headed? I had an opportunity just to sit with my son in a boat and just fish for the week. And it was a great place. And it was a great time to be able to do that. And I was surrounded by people like here. And then I went back to New York. And it took me about 3 days before I looked at my staff and I said, we did this all last year? Really? I can't do it for another day. How did we do it for a whole year? It's an amazing time that we live in. But the people who are the normal people, not the people, and I don't mean that there aren't normal people in New York, of course there are. I mean the people who currently have power, the establishment, whatever that establishment is, whether it's the Republican establishment or the Democratic establishment or the establishment of the media or big business. I got news for you. The best news that happened this week is the establishment is freaked on all levels, and it's a good thing. When the establishment is freaked, the people will be free. When the establishment is afraid that you are on to them, you will be free. So our first step has been accomplished. Our first step, 18 months ago, I said, remember who you were on 9/12. It's who you really are. You didn't need to be told that. You knew that. But because of political correctness, we were all too afraid to say anything to each other. So you didn't know. You didn't know if you were alone. You didn't have to change much in your own life, but I bet many of you have. I bet many of you are doing things and saying things and being places that you never ever thought you would do, never thought you would go to, never thought you'd be a part of, never thought you'd believe. But you've challenged yourself every step of the way. 18 months ago, I had to convince you that you weren't alone. This week, how many people in the establishment, after so long of saying that you're nothing, you're no one, your voice is not real, you're a terror threat, you're violent, you're crazy, you're just a bunch of old people, whatever the smear was, this week, you threw them out on their butt, and they are freaked out. So now, what happens? Now, you can go with renewed vigor and renewed pace, and you can say, get out of my way. Or you can let that power add to your humility. You can let that power add to the softness of your voice and the softness of your message. And you can say, brother, I know people said that we were just into our own power and we just wanted it our way, but we don't. We want it the American way. We want to create opportunities for all people. We don't hate, we love. We have charity in our hearts, not the kind of charity where they take it from you, but the kind of charity where we give because we want to. Now is the time to redouble our efforts. Now is the time. The reason I've gotten a lot of heat this week from saying to the Tea Party members, now is the time to put the signs down. And a lot of people are angry at me for that. And that's okay. I'm not the leader of the Tea Party. I may have suggested the 9/12 Project, but I'm not the leader of the 9/12 Project. You know what I am? I'm a reminder. That's all I am. We each have our jobs, and I'm a reminder. My job a year and a half ago is to remind you, you're not alone. My job the whole time this last year has been to remind you who you are. And now my job is to remind you that you're there. You're there. You have accomplished what you set out to accomplish. Now, don't get drunk with power, and know that what you have to do, if I may be a reminder, is to reach out to the people who are just like you, but they have been convinced that they're not like you by the media or by one or both of the political parties. They have tried to paint you into something that you're not. They have tried to paint you any way they could for a year and a half. I have never seen such a hardcore campaign to smear a group of Americans as this. So now, the people who don't know you, the people who let me tell you a story. George Lang is my photographer. He's the only guy that up until yesterday, because the New York Times is doing a story. They did 3 months of research on me. I can't believe what it's going to be. It's got to be nasty. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. And they said, well, you don't have to take a picture with one of our photographers, but we're going to run a picture anyway. And so I thought, well, I better roll the dice and have them take the picture. But it's the first picture I've ever had anyone take a picture of me since that crying photo and the cover of the Time magazine. That was the same session. And I was lied to about that by a photographer who, in the end, she put Vicks Vapor Rub underneath my eyes, and she asked me, she said, we're going to do this thing in GQ magazine, and we're going to be the happy face and the smiley face, because it was about my tours, and it's about drama and comedy that I do on stage, or used to. And so she convinced me, and I looked her in the eye. I said, look me in the eye. Is that really what you're going to do? She said, oh, yeah. And I said, you give me your word? Oh, yeah. She was lying to me. She was videotaping the whole exchange, which she edited later for the internet. And they took that picture, which was taken completely out of context, and they just plastered it everywhere. And then we had a contract with GQ, because believe it or not, they wanted to have me in GQ for some reason. And they used one of those pictures from that session. But then the picture of me on Time magazine sticking my tongue out was actually from that same session, and I sat down with her, and she was very, very kind and very nice, and she said, okay, just let me just get a quick shot and make sure the lighting's right. And she said, what do you want to say to Time magazine? And I said, and that's what they used. Since then, because I looked at her when I was leaving the photo shoot, and I said, I've seen your work. It's beautiful work. And you're an artist. And in my own way, so am I. And I have really exposed myself to you, and I've trusted you on your word. Please, be a woman of honor. I said, I've exposed myself. And she said, oh, no, and you're so nice. About 30 minutes later, she was on the internet blogging how she got me. So needless to say, we hired one of the best photographers we could out of New York, and he's the guy who takes photos for me, and he's the guy who took all the pictures of 828. And the reason why I hired him is because he's the most liberal guy I know. I mean, I'm not kidding you. He came over to my house about a year ago. He was taking some pictures of me in my pool underwater. And so he had his swimsuit on, and he came out of my house with his swimsuit on, and he said, look, you'll be proud of me. I'm wearing an American flag. And I looked at him and I said, George, that's the Cuban flag. And he looked down and he went, oh crap, it is, isn't it? He didn't know. He is the most liberal guy I know. He's damn near communist, but he's a decent man. He is a decent man. And the reason why I hired him is because the first time we did a photo shoot together, he didn't know me. This is about 3 years ago. And he said to me, he's loading up. And in New York, everybody just assumes that you're communist. And I said, how are you, Mr. Lang? And good. And he's working on some stuff. And he said, boy, I was just asked to do a photo shoot for George Bush. But man, I hate that guy. And he said, but you know what? I turned him down. He said, it would have been very big for me to take a picture. He said, but when you photograph somebody, He said, you owe it to them to take the best photo to capture who they really are. And because I only could see him from the side that I really don't like, I knew I couldn't take a flattering picture of him, and that would be wrong. And I looked at George, and I put my hand out, and I said, Mr. Lang, I like George W. Bush. I don't feel the same way that you do. I said, but I want to shake your hand. You're a man of honor. Thank you very much. We've been great friends ever since. He's come out, and he was at 828, and he's been telling me about how much he just doesn't like Sarah Palin and how much he thinks she's a fraud and everything else. Every time we get on an airplane together, he starts in on Sarah Palin. And he's the guy who captured the photo, I don't know if you've seen it on TV, with Sarah Palin for about 20 minutes standing backstage at 828 all by herself. She didn't think anybody was watching, and she prayed. And he watched her like a hawk. And he said to me, he first said to her, and then he said to me afterwards, he said, Glenn, I have to apologize. He said, I may not agree with her policies, but she's real. I like her. The reason why I tell you that story, is because we must become those people. We must give people the opportunity to see who we are. Because right now the media has you painted with signs and everything else. We must be able to have them look at us and be comfortable enough to be around us and listen to our message. Listen to our message. Because our message is not one for the Republicans and it's not one for the Democrats. It's all for one message for all Americans. And so we must now go out and reach beyond ourselves and make ourselves accessible to all people, all Americans, because our message is true, and here it is. First, we have to ask ourselves, is the American experiment over? Is it over? Because our founders knew that at one time it would come to an end. But Thomas Jefferson said, yes, but when it does, those Americans, they will look back and they will realize what we were trying to do, and they will set it right. Well, gang, I got news for you. This is that time. But they knew that the American experiment, that Thomas Jefferson thought it would last 20 years, that the American experiment would fail. Now, an experiment implies something. An American experiment implies that there are things that happen, you do them, it doesn't work, you get rid of those, and you focus again on the things that you know did work. That's what an experiment does. Well, now we are coming to a place where we will be remembered in history. Mark my words, we will be remembered in history as the people who for the first time in the history of man, because every great civilization gets to this point, every time, do we destroy ourselves or do we reach inside and become something greater than we can possibly even imagine now? When I asked people to come for 828, did anybody go? Anybody here that went? God bless you. My business partner said to me, when I first gave him this idea, he said, Glenn, we're not a charity. We are a business. Do you have any idea what that will do to our business and to our staff and everything else? I said, yes, I do, but we have to do it. And he asked me the last question. He said, what happens if you do all this and nobody comes? And I said, I trust in the Lord, and I trust in the American people. If we build it correctly, they will come. We are living in a time of miracles. When I first said people will come, I didn't think the crowd would be as big as 87,000 people. Assuming that there were at least 500,000 people on the mall, which there were more, but assuming that there were, that is the 5th largest gathering on the mall in our nation's history, the 5th. It was about 650 that showed up, but let's just say it was just 500,000, the 5th, and the largest collection of people to ever come to the mall in Washington for a private citizen asking them to come. The largest gathering in our history. The reason why I tell you that is because when you first heard it, did you think it would be the largest gathering in history? When I first said the 9/12 Project, did you think that it would turn into what it is now? Alveda King, who is just one of the bravest ladies. She is, yes. She was backstage with me at 8:28, and the two things happened. She was terrified. She was terrified. Her father had died, her uncle had died, and before she came, her daughter looked at her and said, "Mom, you know they killed Uncle Martin and Grandpa. Please, please, Mom, just come home afterwards." She was afraid. I was wearing a bulletproof vest. She asked for one, and at the last minute decided not to. You'll see if you look at the pictures, when I'm speaking on stage, if you look at the pictures, you will see on the Lincoln Memorial, and you will see on top, you will see black-clad figures. Those were snipers. Those were people that were watching the crowd. It was an amazing moment. And she said to me right before she, God bless her, right before she went on stage, she was standing back and she was all by herself and she was gathering her thoughts. And I walked by and I said, "Dr. King, are you ready?" I said, "It was on this date that your uncle stood right there. Are you ready?" She looked up at me and she had tears in her eyes. She said, "Will you pray with me, Glenn?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I will." And so I came over and I hugged her and we started to pray. And her whole demeanor changed. And when you saw her walk out, she was alive and vibrant. It happened in that moment. And as I walked away, I said, "You're going to be great. You're going to be great." And I turned around and started walking away. And she said, "Glenn Beck?" I turned around and I said, "Yes, Dr. King." And she said, "One more thing. The next time you tell me you've got a big idea that's going to change the world and miracles will happen, I'm going to believe you." So let me tell you this. Miracles are on the way. Miracles are beginning to happen. And we must count on those miracles, and we must put ourselves in a position, quite honestly, where we can demand those miracles. We can call them down, but only if we are in the flow with God, only if we know we are on His side. We're not demanding and saying that He's on our side. We must be on His side. And when times get tough, you can call Him down. "Lord, I've done everything you've asked me to. It's your turn now." But miracles are coming, and this is it. The question is the American experiment over, or is this just a new chapter? Are we going to change the world? And you know what? Elkhart, I have to tell you that, is there anybody here from Elkhart? Today, I want you to know that you will play a role. I want you to remember yourself when I'm talking about charity and I'm talking about responsibility. And I'm talking about the American attitude. For the stimulus package to be kicked off there, and for a group of Americans this is one of the most underreported stories of my life, I think, for a group of Americans to say, no thank you, we'll do it on our own, is in itself today a miracle. And I am going to make sure that the rest of the country knows your story. I am going to make sure in the next year I am going to be showing people and communities that are saying, no, 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 we're coming up with a different way. No, 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 we're not going to live the way everybody else is. We're not going to live the way we've lived in the past. We are turning the page. And Elkhart is one of the places that I want to highlight because of that story. Time Magazine last week did a story on me, and I love it. They said that 8/28, I called all these people together, and then I didn't really have a plan for them. I was confused, and I confused the audience. And I'm like, no, I think I just confused the reporters. But they said, I love this, they have been for the last 18 months claiming that I was the leader of the Tea Party and the leader of 9/12, and I'm the bad guy, and go get him because he's the leader. And the whole time I've been saying, no, I'm not the leader. And then in this particular article, they blamed me because they said, he's no leader. I think you finally got that right. Here's the thing. I asked Bill O'Reilly last night, I said, if I asked you who the leader of the United States of America was, who would you say? And Bill immediately said, Barack Obama. And I said, wrong, Mr. O'Reilly. It is we the people. We lead the way. The people lead the way, and when the people lead, the leaders will follow. That's the way it is. Government has never provided any answers. They create the problems. It's the people that create the answers. If you just look at the difference between public and private, hello, you've got public housing or private housing. Which would you rather have? You have public schools or private schools. Which would you rather have your kids go to? You have private bathrooms and public bathrooms. I think I'm going to go with a private answer every single time. The answers come from you. That was the American experiment. Can people learn correct principles and then rule themselves? The answer is yes. We've done it. The rest of the world has failed to do it, but we have always blazed the way, and we have always been the one that changed everything. Everything changed. Remember, when they scratched out the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, they did it via candlelight. It was the light bulb. It was electricity. It was all of it that came from America. The world was in literal and spiritual darkness for thousands of years until people were awakened with the ideas of God and liberty and the combining of God and government, not putting them together like everybody else did, but people saying there's just going to be just enough government to keep us all safe. And we're going to focus on God and focus on the things we want to do. That's when the world changed. So now we have to renew ourselves in that. We now have to look at what created this country. It wasn't the government that created Microsoft. It was a little pimply-faced kid in a garage that created Microsoft. It wasn't the government that created Apple and the iPod. It was Steve Jobs. Key word, Jobs. So now what are we going to do? Well, we have to figure out how we got here, and that's what we've been doing the last year, and it's really quite easy. I told you before, it was about 1915-ish, 1915-ish, that the progressives first came to power. Teddy Roosevelt was our first progressive. He started the Progressive Party. As much as everybody loves to say, especially John McCain, he loves Theodore Roosevelt. Once you really understand who Theodore Roosevelt is, the complete picture, you will no longer question John McCain. You will understand, oh, that makes perfect sense. When he said on the campaign trail, I love Theodore Roosevelt, I went, oh my gosh, now I get it. Now I get it. It's like anybody now, the DNC, believe it or not, go to, like, I think it's democrats.org or something, and they're now selling posters of Woodrow Wilson. No, let them hold Woodrow Wilson up. Just educate all your friends on who Woodrow Wilson really was, the first president to ever round people up and put them in concentration camps, only followed by the other great progressive president, FDR. You let them do that. But make sure you tell all your Republican friends they weren't alone in that. Teddy Roosevelt was the same. Teddy Roosevelt, I've got letters from Teddy Roosevelt that will scare the pants off of you, talking about how, you've got to do the right things for genetics, and we got to look at people and the government like the people like animals, and the government like ranchers. And you'd never let, as a good rancher, you'd never let your animals, your best animals, breed with your worst animals, would you? I mean, that's Theodore Roosevelt. Spooky stuff. So it didn't take America very long. It's almost like it is now. It took America about 2 years to figure out who progressives really were, and it scared the living daylights out of them. Remember, they brought us the Fed, the income tax, the progressive income tax, prohibition. They brought us the League of Nations, and that was our snapping point. By the way, Woodrow Wilson, he ran his second term on I will keep you out of war. He was inaugurated in January. The next month, we went to war. That's why we needed propaganda, because he now needed to be able to flip that on itself. And that's why he made enemies of German Americans in America, because he had to paint them into evil people. So people figured it out pretty quickly. Once we got past war, they figured it out, and it scared them. So 1915-ish to about 1922, that's when they said, okay, if we're going to do this progressive thing, if we're going to make progress past the Constitution, what is stopping us? What was it that the American people, the dumb voters that were eventually going to be able to use eugenics and breed past, what is it we have to do? Well, there were 3 things that stopped the progressives last time: our faith, our history, and our Constitution. And here's how it worked. Faith, people were charitable because of their faith. Our history, we were tied to our founders and we loved them. And our Constitution had certain parameters. Well, they couldn't do anything because these were roadblocks. So they had to destroy our faith. And they did it with something that most people don't even know. Talked to a priest earlier today, and he came up to me and he said, thank you for social justice and exposing, and thank you, Father, for knowing what it is. In our churches, and I mean all of our churches, there are termites. Some of them are just full-fledged wolves that have been eating for so long that our churches are nothing anymore. Some of them just have a little bit of termites. But you must get this out. You must know what social justice and collective salvation and all of this nonsense is all about and where it came from. And it was put into our churches by the progressives to destroy us. The next thing is they had to stop our history. We had such profound love for our founders. People knew who George Washington was. I have to tell you, I cry almost every time I talk about George Washington because that man was such an honorable man. He may have been, next to Jesus Christ, he may have been the best man to ever live. And people don't really know that anymore. We did we did about the turn of the last century, and it wasn't until about 1923 that they started getting our history books changed. It was a group of professors out of Columbia University that got together, and then they spread all of this nonsense. About 1923, they wrote a book about our founders, that they're old, they were white, they were rich, they were all slave owners. We had never concentrated on that before. It was the progressives that disconnected us from our history. And then our Constitution, 1920, Harvard University, they decide that they're now going to study case law. Before, we used to study the Constitution. We used to study the Constitutional Convention. We read the Federalist Papers. We argued back and forth on what the Constitution meant, what was the original intent. But to make progress, you can't go back to the original. That's old, that's dusty, that's useless. It's really not applicable anymore. We need to look at case study. If we look at case study, well, then we can make progress. And before you know it, the Constitution is so irrelevant that it doesn't matter anymore. This was the time bomb that they planted. Now, I have been saying for a while, if this is what they did, the remedy is what? To restore our faith, our history, and our Constitution. I have been trying for the last year and a half to teach history. And you have done a great job. You have picked up books that you never read before. You've picked up ideas that you'd never heard before. And if you're anything like me, when you started to do this, all of a sudden, everything started to make sense. You before, if you're like me, 2.5 years ago, you were like, how did we get here? What happened? How did this happen to us? But once you started reading history, all of a sudden, you know it to be true because now everything makes sense. Now you can see, it's like you were missing puzzle pieces. Now you can put them in and go, oh my gosh, look at. All right, so that was the first thing. Now the second thing is to restore our faith, and that one is up to you. And our Constitution, that one is up to you as well. Each of us have to do the things in our own life for history, for faith, and our Constitution, because it is up to us. It is up to each of us. I love these professors and these pastors and everybody else that try to make themselves the gatekeeper. Excuse me? It is my relationship with God, not yours. It is my country's history as well. And I'm named in the Constitution, and so are you. It belongs to us, not to people that are the gatekeepers. Am I the sweatiest human being you've ever seen in your life? I can't wait for winter. Come back to Elkhart in the winter? Well, I know I'm not going to Driggs, Idaho for the winter, so. All right. The media cannot figure out what I'm doing and what you're doing. And this is a great thing. I look at this now as the blessing that it really is. I used to be frustrated. And it was, I don't know, sometime this last summer that I realized darkness cannot comprehend the light. The greatest thing, there's two things on this. One, the greatest thing is you can have a dark room. We can seal every crack in this room. We can turn out all the lights. We can make it as dark as you can be. And we could get the poorest and the youngest of us to go down the store, go down to Home Depot or the hardware store and get a flashlight for about $5 and bring light to this room. However, with all the light that we have in this room, we could get the richest, we could take all of the riches of the world. We can get all of the greatest brainiacs and scientists of the world, and none of them can bring darkness into this room. So here's the thing. Darkness does not comprehend the light. And as long as we are focused on the light, they'll never see you coming. They'll never don't expect them to. They'll never understand you. But here's the other part. They'll never see you coming. It's like we have the Harry Potter invisibility cloak, where all of a sudden it's happened this week with the establishment, where all of a sudden you just pop out and you're like, hello? And they have no idea how you even got there. It's fantastic. It is fantastic, and it should give you great, great hope. Now here's what happened, and here's what we have to do now. Back when we started our country, our foundation was God. And God taught us to be charitable. Why is it that we're the most charitable people on earth? Why? Is there something in the Wheaties that we eat? No. It's that we were founded on the principles of God. And because God taught us to be charitable, we gave to charity. And then that little itty bitty part that we couldn't do, we allowed government to do, because we couldn't do it for ourselves. That's the way it used to work. But now, we flipped this upside down. We've got government, which teaches us not about charity, but about social justice. And you can still keep your God, but just keep him down here and kind of keep it to yourself, because that's your final choice. That's up to you. This is for all the people, and we have to do these things for justice, and whatever you do down here, that's your business. No, sorry. The reason why we're in this problem, and the reason why I'm now getting more heat, bring it on, is because I'm now talking about God. Because what we've done to our preachers, our pastors, our priests, our rabbis, is we have told them, Father, talk to me about that on Sunday. It's party day. I'm sorry, but talk about it in everyday life. Talk about how God moves you, motivates you, and blesses you every day of your life. Church is on Sunday, God is all week. Now, Benjamin Franklin was asked about God in the 1700s by the president of Yale University. Who's God exactly? What is this American religion? Back in those days, Yale University was a place of deep, profound religious study. It wasn't a hostile question back then. But Benjamin Franklin thought about it. And he thought, okay, what is the American religion? Because remember, our founders fought for other people's rights in religions that they disagreed with. It was Samuel Adams who was, you want to talk about a religious zealot, it was Sam Adams. Now, this is the reason why we only know him as the beer guy. Because the only thing you could ever say about Samuel Adams was, man, he loved the Lord. Man, he stood up for God. That was his whole life. That's why we don't know about him. And he said when they first did Congress, they had their first session, they said, well, let's start with prayer. And they argued back and forth, who's going to lead us in prayer? Who's going to lead us in prayer? I don't agree with him, and he's a Quaker, and he's an Anglican, and I don't agree with any of these people here. What are we going to do? Samuel Adams finally stood up and he said, I am no man's bigot. I will pray with any man. And he looked to the guy in the room who was the most unlike him in faith. And he said, will you lead us in prayer? That first session of Congress, they prayed for 2 hours. 2 hours they prayed. So when Benjamin Franklin was asked, what is the American religion? He said, it's pretty easy. First, that there is a God. Second, that we will meet him when we die. Third, he can sometimes be a little pissed off. I'm paraphrasing. So the best way to have a good judgment is number 4, serve him. And number 5, the best way to serve him is to serve his fellow creation. So, there is a God. He'll judge us after our death. And the best way to please him is to serve other people. That is why we are the most charitable people on earth, and we're still just living off of the fumes. If the American experiment is going to survive and thrive, we must not live on these fumes anymore. We must renew this so it will renew this, so we will see our obligations. Forget your rights. Stop talking about your rights. Pick up your responsibilities. When you pick up your own responsibilities, your rights will be restored automatically. And if there happen to be atheists here, I was going to say God bless you, but may my glasses bless you. It doesn't matter. If you're an atheist, I know one of hardcore libertarian atheists, Penn Jillette. He's a decent man. Do I have a problem with Penn Jillette? No, he has a problem with me because I'm a man of faith. He thinks it makes me less intelligent, but whatever. Boy, is he going to be surprised. Here's the thing. I have a very good friend who's Jewish, and we made a pact early on in our relationship. I said, look, I believe the Messiah has already come. You don't. Let's make a pact. When we die, if we find out he's already been here, I'll vouch for you. If it's his first time, you vouch for me. We don't have problems with people's individual beliefs in this country. We just want something that makes them into a responsible human being where we can be neighbors and help each other in times of need. As Thomas Jefferson said, if it neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg, what difference is it to me? When you're talking about the government, if it neither picks your pocket, which that list is really long, nor breaks your leg, which universal health care, what difference does it make to you? Let's not separate us. Let's not separate ourselves. Let's pull together, because tough times are coming, but we'll make it. As long as we strengthen our bonds with each other, and as long as we understand that character does matter. Character does matter. You know why we're in this problem now? It's because we've convinced ourselves that character doesn't matter. We've been taught character doesn't matter. Well, he does it as private life. Excuse me. If I can't get a guy and trust him in one part of his life, I can't trust him in any part of his life. That's the way it is. With that understanding, none of us are Jesus. None of it. We're not Paul. We're not Buddha. We're people. We all make mistakes. But when we make mistakes, do we learn from them? Do we say, forgive me? Here's what happened. And I'm not looking for your sympathy, but here's what happened. This happened and this happened, and I found myself making the wrong decision, and I will pay the full price for what I did. Forgive me. I've learned my lesson. And then move on. But if somebody doesn't learn their lesson, if they can't admit their mistakes, if you don't, let me ask you this. Close your eyes for a second. And imagine the time where you struggled the hardest. Try to see the times and the faces and the places you were when you struggled the most, when you really were at your wit's end and you didn't know if you were going to make it even. Now imagine a time where you learned the most in your life, where there was an unending period where you just grew and expanded and learned. I'm guessing that both of those are either the same time period or darn close to it. Only through struggle and strife and mistakes and problems do you grow, do you learn. When we take someone's strife away or minimize it, before they have had the opportunity to grow and expand, you cripple them. You must be able to learn. That's what we are. We are here to learn and expand. That's what an American experiment is. Try it out. Learn. Will it work? The people we now ask to represent us, we say these people don't represent us. I'm sorry, but I think in many cases they do. Look at our corporations. Many times they're corrupt. They don't care about values. They don't care about principles. Many times they will just stick it to anybody they can for $1. The banks did the same. The government has done the same. Many of us in our own lives have done the same. Enough is enough. Character matters. Set it right. Punish those who have failed. Punish those who have cheated. Let those who have just simply failed or been struggling rise up, gather their own wits, and start again. And that's when we reach to each other and say, I'm there for you. I'll help you. There is no easy way out. There is no way to have it all. Yes, I'm sorry, America, but once in a while it is your kid. That's just the way it is. It's all of our kids. What do you think? Your family is that different than mine? We're all the same. We're all struggling. You know what the deal is with America? We're not lazy. We're tired. We're tired. We've been told we're not complete unless we have so much stuff. You know why I loved going to Trix, Idaho last week? Because it wasn't about stuff. It was about people. And it was just about an easy, simple lifestyle. Just go out and fish and farm. Treat each other right. Labels don't matter. The size of your house out in Trix, Idaho, the size of your house is a joke. There's a guy who has a big, huge, monstrous house in the middle of this farming community, and he looks ridiculous in it. Everybody else just has a normal house. That's great. I sat in my friend's living room, and this guy must be about 65 years old, John Pearson. He came over with his wife, and he had a guitar, and my little kids are running around, and my college-age kids were with us. And he brought his guitar, and he said, I was just singing you guys some songs tonight. And we sat around after we ate, and he just sat and he played songs, and they were the goofiest songs I had ever heard. And it was great. By the end of the evening, all of us were crying because we were happy. It was simple. That's what it really is. It's simple. Life is not easy. It's simple. The answers we're looking for, none of them are going to be easy. But they are simple. The truth shall set you free. but it will make you miserable first. So our charge now, our challenge, is to continue to learn our history, to get back down on our knees, to learn from our mistakes, to admit our problems and our failings, not to finger point, but to forgive and to fix. Now that's the problem. Nobody wants to say it was their fault, because then everybody points to them, and then they are sued, and then they end up broke. When really, why do you admit that there's a problem? You admit that there's a problem so we can fix it. Are we in America in this together or not? Are we going to drink from the bitter cup over and over again as soon as someone else gets power? Do we then say, aha, it was your fault and I'm going to punish you? Or do we say, oh, thank goodness, whoa, you were a horror show. But here's what's going to happen now. I'm not going to punish you. I'm going to show you how it really can be, how we really can work together. We need each other. We need each other. The weakest and the strongest of us. I got news for you. The world has changed. You cannot compete against China anymore. We are going to have to reinvent ourselves. But while we're sitting here thinking, okay, wait a minute, the world is changing, let's not hold on to all the old stuff because it's old stuff that we just know. If it's useful, we hang on to it. If it's not, we jettison it. Because we must reinvent ourselves. But we must have honest brokers who look for our problems to be able to fix them, not to finger point or to go onto a world apology tour. But to be able to say, yes, manifest destiny was a nightmare. A nightmare. What this country, the more, like my daughter actually, turned me on to history. I turned her on to history, and then she went to a ordinarily liberal college. It kills me to pay for that. Well, you have no idea. Last year, they had a symposium on how evil I am. I wrote the dean and I said, could you just make sure none of my daughter's tuition goes to that symposium? But she went for history. When my kids were about this big, they didn't like history, so I got them into history. I told history to them as stories, not as dates and places. They got into it. And now she's in college. She wants to be in history. She wants to make documentaries about history. And I said to her, great, we're gonna make all these documentaries on history, etc., etc. And she said, oh, Dad, no, not American history. I said, what? And she said, oh, you don't know, Dad, you're just so happy about American history, and I understand that American history is good, some of it, but you don't recognize how much of it is really bad. Well, I said I did. I was gonna prove her wrong. Well, I proved her wrong, and she proved me wrong. It's the best kind of honest questioning. I hate Woodrow Wilson. And I'm beginning to feel the same way about Andrew Jackson. He's my latest. And I think that, is that applause for hating Andrew Jackson? Up there in the cheap seats, good for you. Here's a new theory I'm working out with a couple of guys at Cambridge. My theory is that when the founders died, we really kind of lost our way. And we went from divine providence to manifest destiny. And the difference between the two is enormous. Divine providence is the flow of God, if I may. Do we have any fly fishermen here? Just a couple? When I was fly fishing last week, I thought, boy, this is divine providence. I'm standing in the river, and you cast upstream, and then you just let it flow. And you're watching it. You mend the line. And you know if you're in the flow of the river and you're doing everything right, it's not a miracle that you're going to catch a fish. Well, actually it is with me, but usually with other people, it's not a miracle. You're in the flow of the river. You're doing the right thing. Eventually fish are going to bite. It's not a coincidence. What a coincidence. I was standing in the river with bait and a hook, and I caught fish. You're in the flow. That's divine providence. People think they're coincidence, but you're just living your life in the right way. And once in a while, God is there, and you're like, whoa, did you see that? That was cool. Wipe out all coincidence in your life. Spend the next 30 days challenging yourself to say, that wasn't a coincidence. When you hear it, when you see it, if it's something you've been thinking, something else you've been hearing, God is sending you messages. Listen to that message. You're in the flow. It's amazing that the guy who didn't listen for a long time, after a while, he just starts kicking you in the head. You really listen when they're easy messages. So, that's divine providence. You're in the flow. Manifest destiny is something entirely different, and that is, I'm on a mission from God. Get out of my way. That is where we have gone wrong. When we claim to be on God's side, no, we must always be careful and humble enough to be on His side. So, we do one thing. And I ask you to do, I asked this on 828, and I'm going to keep doing it until I can get, we have 30 million people in the, what's called the Glenbeck footprint, they tell me, which means 30 million people every month watch, listen, or read stuff from us. That's 10% of the population. That's an enormous amount of people. 10% can change the world. I believe that Thomas Jefferson, I know that Thomas Jefferson was into codes. He was into puzzles. He said, if you really want to make a message stick, if you really want people to understand your message, for a very long time, don't write it down in a book. Encode it. Encode it in architecture. He was fascinated with different languages and puzzles. Now, I don't know if this was a puzzle or if this was a code to us, but I believe it wasn't a coincidence that the first 3 letters of our Constitution are about this big and the rest of them are about this big. It's not like they were like, oh crap, I gotta change the font, it won't all fit on the page. It was because they knew dummies like me would come along and we'd be lost and be like, what is the answer? Gee, I wish I knew what the answer is. We the people. That's what those 3 words were. It was code. Wake up, it's you. Now, whether this is code or not, I don't know, but I choose to believe it is. 40 days and 40 nights. I want you to dedicate yourself to this in the next 40 days and 40 nights. Every day you work on this. Every day you find your way to this. This is the last line of the Declaration of Independence, and it has always been my favorite line. And with firm reliance in divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And it's just beautiful. But that's not the reason why I love it. I love it because they meant it. They meant it. Now we can say that to each other now, all with firm reliance. I pledge to my life, my fortune, my sacred honor. I do. That's not what they did. And that's what, if we're going to be the generation that not only saves the country, but makes sure the world doesn't plunge into darkness, we must understand what every word means with firm reliance. That implies faith is not enough. Faith is not enough. Firm reliance means, as Thomas Jefferson said, when it comes to religion above all things, fix reason firmly in her seat and question with boldness even the very existence of God. For if there be a God, he must surely rather honest questions over blindfolded fear. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Well, you're a dad. How many kids do you have? 5. 5. You're a better man than I. Or at least a more active man than I. 5 kids. Would you rather have your kids come to you every day and say, I love you, Dad? Or would you rather have your kids, at one point or another, come to you as they're starting to grow into their own and say, you know, Dad, I've said I love you my whole life, but I'm not really sure I do. I don't know why I do. I want to find out why. I don't know that much about you. You say you love me, but I'm not really sure. I'm going to dig up everything I can on you, Dad. I'm going to ask everybody around, why? Why should I love you? Who you really are, and why you love me. And then, as long as they're honest questions, because that would be my advice to my child, you just make sure you give me a shot to answer any charges that you may have. And don't ask questions with an agenda. Your only agenda, let it be the truth. And one of my guys said to me, he said, I get you a Coke, you need anything, what do you want? And I looked at that and I said, I want to be done. I just want to go back fishing with my son. I just want to be done. We are all going to come to that point. The trials in our life are going to be here, and they're going to keep coming. And we're going to need to know that we can depend on God and each other. When they said firm reliance not on manifest destiny, but divine providence, stand in the flow of that river, that we mutually pledge to each other our lives. There have been times, and will be times, when we say, we can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore. But we will. And it will be good. It will be good. I said to my daughter before she went to college, and she's like, well, that's not very helpful, Dad. And I said, listen to the whole phrase. I said, life is hard. And then you die. She just looked at me and she said, well, that's not very helpful. And I said, but every second of life is worth it. Every second of life is worth it. The thing I noticed as I was in the river and I was mending my line, I was in the now. I wasn't in the future. I wasn't in the past. I was right there. That's where you need to be. Right now. Experience every single second. And you'll make it. And you'll grow and expand. You'll be tired, but you'll make it. George Washington is my favorite founder because of a couple things he did. He was really a bad commander at first. He stunk on ice for almost the first 8 months. It was really until the crossing of the Delaware. That's where things turned for him. He was bad. We were losing everything. In the end, we won. But most people don't know who that guy really was. He was a guy that his soldiers really thought divine providence was all around him, that there was something special about him, because he would ride a giant white horse in a uniform and a hat in the battlefield. I mean, basically wearing a shirt that said, "Kill me, here I am." He would come off the battlefield and there would be holes in his jacket and no wounds. Somebody would be firing at him and he'd lift up his arm and his jacket. People thought he was a miracle, a miracle. In Valley Forge, they didn't have shoes, you know, but they didn't have pants. Many of them didn't have pants. Martha Washington spent most of her time out on the battlefield with George, sewing, making shirts and pants for the men. These were a group of farmers. It was incredible. When they won, Congress wouldn't pay them. Not a lot has changed. Congress wouldn't pay them. Congress said, well, we've got other things we have to do now. And this infuriated the men. And they did the most dishonorable thing they could. In their anger, they said, we're going to go and kill and slaughter everyone in Congress. In their dishonor. In their moment of understandable anger, they were about to dishonor themselves. And George Washington said, you can't do that. We'll lose everything we fought for. I will go and I'll talk to him again. And he went to Philadelphia and he begged them, guys, please, you don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're saying. You don't know what these men have gone through. You've got to pay them. He got one person to write a letter in Congress. Yes, I will work tirelessly. I will do everything I can to make sure you are paid. He took that letter and put it in his pocket and he wrote back to his men. Well, by the time he got back, the men were meeting in a secret location, and George Washington knew exactly what they were doing. They were plotting and they were planning to go get Congress. And he walked in the door, this giant of a man they thought was invincible, a man they thought was divinely inspired and sent from heaven, and no one could kill or hurt. And he walked into that room, and he looked at him and he said, gentlemen, I know what you are planning, but we did not conquer one tyrant to replace him with another. You must not do these things. He said, I have a letter. I just got back from Congress. And he pulled the letter out, and he realized he couldn't see him because of his glasses, his eyes, but he realized at the same time too, nobody had ever seen him with his glasses on. He reached into his pocket and he took out his glasses and he put them on his face. And he realized that in that act of humility, his soldiers looked at him differently. And he looked up at them and he said, I am sorry. But in the service of my country, my eyes have grown weak and I have grown gray and tired. He took his glasses off without reading the letter, put it back into his pocket, and walked out. We know what happened. They went back to their lives and they did not go to Congress. But do you know the price that this man paid for that? When the war was over and the treaties were signed, George Washington stood virtually alone because his soldiers were angry at him. He went back to his farm, which is something all he wanted to do in his whole life was be a farmer in Mount Vernon. That's it. He went back to his farm, and when things were falling apart again, They came knocking at his door, and they said, "General, it's falling apart. We need to have a constitutional convention, and no one will listen to each other. We can't get the sides together. And if you don't come, you're the only man that just by your very presence, you're the indispensable man. You just by standing there will hold us together so we'll have a chance. Please, General, please, you must come to Philadelphia." His response at the door was, "Have I not yet done enough for my country?" And he closed the door. He knew the answer was no. In my mind's eye, I see him standing there with his back turned to the front door. And then squaring his shoulders and saying, "Martha, I need to leave." With firm reliance on divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives. It doesn't mean that we will die necessarily. It means that we may have to live a different life that none of us would choose for ourselves. At some point, we all may say, "Have I not yet done enough for my country?" It is your privilege. It will be your honor to serve and to pass it on. Our fortunes, it means give. Find God and give. For if you don't give, the government must. If you don't become more charitable, and I know you already are, but if you don't do it, you cannot have a small government. It may mean just giving up your pension or the Social Security or part of the Social Security that you paid in. You paid in, I paid in, we've all paid in. We have been lied to. We have lied to ourselves. That is the past. What is the now? What are we going to do about it? We're going to give our lives and we're going to give our fortunes so our children can have an opportunity for a better future. Our sacred honor. Out of all of the founders, only one, Benedict Arnold, gave up his sacred honor. Only one. We must be that generation again. None of us want to do these things. Moses didn't want to do it. And Moses was given a stick. If you don't think you have the resources, he was given a stick. Wait a minute. Okay, cool that you can make the bush burn without burning up, but don't you got a bigger bag of tricks than that and a stick? Pick up your stick. You may be slow of speech. You may think I don't have the tools to do it. Yes, you do. You were sent here for a reason. Take off your sandals because this is sacred ground. Pick up your stick. If we pick up our sticks, stop focusing on our rights but our responsibilities. If we teach our children how to do hard work and expect them to do it, if we have firm reliance on divine providence, if we beg him to forgive us, if we expect him to help us, we will be able to face any storm. And I say to you, if we do those things with firm reliance on you and on God, I tell you now, this is not the end of the American experiment. It is the end of the first chapter. It is a point where we turn the page and start to write new words that will enlighten the world. This is the time, this is the place, and you are the people. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. God bless you.
Believe the saying is, if that doesn't light your fire, your wood's wet. At this time, the Patriots Pass holders, if everyone could just have a seat except for those with the Patriot Pass, all of you can begin making your way to the Ark for the book signing. In his first inaugural address, that man Mr. Beck just spoke of, George Washington, said these words: "The sacred fire of liberty is once for all staked on the experiment and trusted to the hands of the American people. We have a calling, we have an obligation, as outlined beautifully by Glenn Beck today. We have the privilege of doing what countless generations before us did, preserving the blessings of liberty not just for ourselves, but for our posterity, so that one day they say of us, they ran the race, they carried the banner, and yes, the sacred fire of liberty still burns." God bless all of you. Please stick around till 4 o'clock when the doors close. There's plenty of food, there's concessionaires' booths, and you can avail yourself to that just now. Again, God bless you and thank you for coming.